Good evening. It is late again, or it is late for the first time, and either way you have come to the still point of the day, the hour when the world lets go of you and you are allowed, at last, to let go of it in return. If you have been with me before, you know how this goes. I am going to tell you a true story, slowly, in the dark, and you are under no obligation to remember a word of it. It is here to keep you company, the way a low light is left burning in the hall, not to be looked at but simply to make the darkness gentler. Follow it as long as you wish. When you begin to drift, let yourself drift. The story will go on without you, patient and unhurried, and it will not mind at all if you fall asleep before the end. Tonight we leave the cold shore of Lake Michigan behind, and we travel east, to the greatest city of them all. To New York, in the years when a handful of ruthless and far-sighted men sat down together and did something that had never been done. They took the chaos of the underworld, the endless war of all against all, and they organized it. They divided a city, and then a nation, among themselves, and drew borders on a map that no one else could see, and built a shadow government that would endure for the better part of a century. This is the story of the 5 families. Settle in, and let us begin. Part 1, the Old World and the New. To understand what these men built, you must first understand the world they tore down. And that world, strange as it may seem, was ruled by old men. By tradition. By a way of doing things carried across the ocean from the villages of Sicily, unchanged and unquestioned. The old bosses were called, among themselves and with a certain mocking reverence by the young men who would one day destroy them, the Mustache Petes. They were men of the old country, who ran their affairs by the customs of the old country. They valued respect, and honor, and the old hierarchies. They distrusted anyone who was not Sicilian, and often anyone who was not from their own particular corner of Sicily. They kept to the traditional rackets. And they warred with one another, endlessly and bloodily, over points of pride and honor that the younger men found not only dangerous but, worst of all, unprofitable. Because a new generation was rising. Young men who had grown up not in the villages of Sicily but on the hard streets of American cities. They had come over as children, or been born here, and they thought like Americans, which is to say they thought about money, and opportunity, and the future, more than about the old codes of honor. They had grown up together in the melting pot of the immigrant slums, and their friendships crossed the old boundaries. A young Sicilian and a young Neapolitan and a young Jewish gangster from the same block might be closer to one another than to any graybeard from the old country. They did not care where a man was born. They cared whether he could earn, and whether he could be trusted, and whether he was useful. And these young men looked at the old bosses, at their endless wars and their narrow traditions and their suspicion of anything new, and they saw not wisdom but waste. They saw money left on the table. They saw opportunities missed. They saw men dying in stupid quarrels over honor when they might all have been growing rich together in peace. And slowly, quietly, dangerously, they began to think that the old men would have to go. Chief among these young men was one who would become the true architect of everything that followed. A quiet, calculating, brilliant organizer named Charles Luciano, whom everyone would come to call Lucky. Part 2, the architect Lucky Luciano is one of those figures who changed the world far more than most of the famous men in the history books, and yet whose name means little to most people today. But if you want to understand how organized crime in America actually came to be organized, you must understand him, because more than anyone else, he was the one who did it. He had come from Sicily as a boy and grown up on the tough streets of the Lower East Side of Manhattan, in that great churning immigrant world where a clever and ruthless young man could rise fast in the only businesses open to him. And he was clever, and he was ruthless, but he was something more than that too. He was a strategist. He thought in systems. Where other gangsters saw only the next score, the next rival, the next quarrel, Luciano saw structures. He saw how the whole thing might fit together. His genius, the thing that set him apart, was that he did not care about the old boundaries. He built alliances across every line the old bosses held sacred. His closest partners included men who were not Sicilian at all, not even Italian. He worked hand in glove with Jewish gangsters of extraordinary talent, financial minds and organizational minds and, when it was needed, men of violence. He understood that talent was talent, wherever it came from, and that an organization built on ability would always defeat one built on the accident of birthplace. And he understood one thing above all, the thing that would become the foundation of everything. He understood that violence was bad for business. Not that he was squeamish about it. Luciano ordered a great many deaths, and we will come to some of them. But he understood violence as a tool, to be used coldly and precisely toward a purpose, never wastefully, never for pride, never for honor. The old bosses killed each other over insults. Luciano wanted killing to be a business decision, rare and deliberate, undertaken only when it served the larger goal of a peaceful and profitable order. It was, in its way, the same cold vision that a quiet man had pursued in Chicago in those same years. The dream of crime as commerce. Of the underworld as a corporation. But Luciano would pursue that vision further, and build it more soundly, and make it last longer, than anyone before or since. First, though, he had to clear away the old world. And that meant the old men had to die. Part 3, the War of the Old Men. It came, as these things do, in the form of a war. The two most powerful of the old Sicilian bosses in New York fell into a great and bloody conflict with one another, a war that raged through the underworld and dragged every ambitious young man into one camp or the other. It was exactly the kind of pointless, wasteful, honor-driven bloodshed that the new generation despised, and it gave them their opportunity. Luciano and the young men around him served under the old bosses, as they had to. But they served without loyalty,